at somebody. And then the Poor People's Campaign, and he has been a stable, steady, reliable friend here in Selma across the years. There are those who would take the persona and the personality of Jesus and manipulate it to suggest that they have monopolized on the smile, gentle Jesus, meek and mild, always up on his face a smile. And they have commercialized it and made it fake, phony, and plastic. But my Bible tells me that Jesus is the embodiment of God. And with even the application of a little bit of Christocentric theology, we still do not exclude the humanity of Jesus, the totality, the full divinity and full humanity of Jesus. Jesus did more than just smile. He wasn't smiling when he went in the temple with a whip in his hand and with anger because he saw religion used in a manipulative kind of way to exploit and take advantage of people. He wasn't smiling. He was even called crazy, you remember. I think it was in Mark 3 or somewhere where his mother Mary went to get him because folk were talking about him so bad behind his back. I don't know any of us who have 100% support from all of our colleagues and peers, but I think is it in John 7 where even Jesus' own brothers didn't support him and didn't believe in him, didn't believe in his mission, didn't believe in his message. I see in this man not only the holiness captured of Jesus, the righteousness. I see not only the holiness, but the holistic. He is for a holistic application of religion, and he is of faith, of spirituality, and he's teaching it now, passing it on to a next generation of young prophets at Yale Divinity School. All of us are happy. All of us are proud of him, not just because he is a faithful warrior of the cross, but there's a holistic quality to his religion. And I could say a whole lot more, but I won't. I will let him just come and in his own holistic kind of a way just apply the message of Jesus Christ to the situation in which we find ourselves. And I hope you'll take away from it the essence, the kernel, and make application, you and I, in our own lives. I'm so happy to have Bishop William Barber II here with us today.
Gracious, eternal God, we thank you for your goodness, for your mercy, for your love, for your kindness, for all of the ways that you have brought us over and brought us through. Let us not merely commemorate what you have done, but re-engage our commitment and make ourselves available vessels for your glory. Do this for us, God, that we might be pleasing in your sight. For it is in your holy name we pray. Amen. To this historic congregation, to the Bishop of Alabama, to all of the people who have come, as they say, protocol having already been established, to the pastor of this church, I said to him to know that we're going to, from the organization Rebuilding Broken Places, give $20,000 to the relief efforts here and $5,000 to Brown Chapel for continuing renovations. And we're honored to do that. Now, I'm getting older now. I've been pastoring 35 years, and I know when sermons have been preached. And so I know when there's a time to just place a capstone on what has already been said. My sister from LDF, we got to make sure we give her some preaching license. Come on up to Yale. And, when we come to Selma, we know every greeting is a sermon. So what do we do with all of this? What do we do with all of this, Bishop? Is there a word from the Lord? In the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, verse 39, there's a word that says, "But we are not of those who shrink back unto destruction, but we are those who persevere unto the salvation of the soul." Now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Would you say with me, shrinking back is not an option. We must stand up and push forward. Say that one more time. Say, shrinking back is not an option. We must stand up and push forward. When this letter to the Hebrews was originally written, the people were suffering under an imperial leader named Claudius. He was a liar. He was always trying to hurt people. He would do anything for power. He had the Senate in his control. And he was doing everything he could. He loved to put his name on buildings. Y'all hear what I'm saying? His name was Claudius. And the people at this time, the Hebrews, were a group of Christians that Paul wrote to, and they were about to get tired. Jesus had been crucified, dead, and buried. And they were expecting the return of Jesus quickly, but Jesus had not come. And in some ways, they were seeing more oppression, things that they thought had already run its course. And some were thinking about turning back. They were thinking about changing their faith. They were thinking about, some of them, getting what they could for themselves and not worrying about anybody else. To them, the Apostle Paul writes, "But remember who you are. We are not of those who shrink back unto destruction, but we are those who persevere unto the salvation of the soul." This is why we come to a place like Selma. Really, I must tell you, I don't like the word commemoration. I don't think you come to holy ground to commemorate it. I think you come to re-engage it. I think you come for consecration, not commemoration. You come that you might be fortified for the fights that you must fight in your generation. In fact, since the earliest days of the Christian church, believers have always made pilgrimages to the places where our martyrs died. And so we come to Brown Chapel today, and even though we're in this space, the spirit of Brown Chapel is here. We come to remember those who left from Brown Chapel and crossed the Edmonds Pettus Bridge, named after a white supremacist and a Klan member. They returned beaten and bloody. They turned Brown Chapel into a field hospital, bandaged up their wounds, and then said, "We are not of those who shrink back unto destruction, but we are those who persevere unto the salvation of the soul. And they went back one more time. I want us to, for a moment, just think about that your voting rights has blood on it. Blood on it. The blood of Jimmy Lee Jackson, the blood of Amelia Boynton, but also the blood of James Reeb, a white Unitarian, and the blood of Viola Woosa, a white woman who was shot 30 minutes after they ended up, Dr. King spoke in Montgomery. And the blood has power. You don't just remember the blood for their sacrifices. In fact, it's actually sacrilege to keep remembering what other people shed and then you not be willing to shed any yourself. Because the best form of flattery is imitation. It's not just merely talking about what people did back then. The question is, what must we do now? They were willing to lay down their lives. They were willing to stand for truth and faith and justice and freedom. There's blood on our right to vote. There's blood on every opportunity that you have. Every place we go, every right that we enjoy. Touch your neighbor and say, there's some blood on it. And the blood keeps drawing us. And so we're gathered here. I hope we're gathered here not to shrink back, but to hold on to the hope that America may yet become what she has promised to be. That's why I raised this text today. We are not of those who shrink back unto destruction. You know, whenever you deal with oppressors, you better know who you are. Because one of the things that an oppressor will do is try to take your mind and make you forget who you are. You've got to define yourself. You've got to know whose you are and who you are so that in the fight you won't forget who you are. And we've always had to fight, Bishop, to know who we are because America has always had a kind of split personality. At times political and social schizophrenia, a great gulf between what she dreams to be and what she really is. That's why one of our national hymns says, America, America, God mend thine every flaw. Dr. King once critiqued this nation. He loved America so he said, let us be dissatisfied until America will no longer have a high blood pressure of creeds and the anemia of deeds. And so, my brothers and sisters, yes, America has made some progress, but this has only come when some people knew who they were and refused to shrink back and instead stood up and pushed forward together. Look at a neighbor and say, shrinking back is not an option. Yes, yes. Yes, and we need to know it didn't just start on Bloody Sunday here. You know, this fight in Selma was 40 years old before Dr. King and John Lewis and them ever came here. Let's tell the whole story. Huh? Before SNCC ever came here, the Dallas County Voting League was here all alone asking people to risk their lives. Long before, in fact, the truth of the matter is somebody told me that when they sent you to Selma, they sent you to die. They sent you to fail. Nobody thought anything good would come out of Selma. It was like Nazareth. Diane Nash and her husband, they didn't go to the March on Washington. They went to Selma. In 1963, August, instead of going to March on Washington, they came to Selma. And they had a mass meeting right across the street. Some of the members wanted to put the pastor out of the church because he opened the church up for the mass meeting. Let's tell the whole story. The police were around the building. There were more police around the building than there were people inside the building. This was 2 years before the march across the Edmonds Bridge. It wasn't but a few people, but they decided shrinking back was not an option. So here we are, Bishop. We claim to be a moral society, and if we are, then we got to face some things and ask the question, what do we do? Do you know, as we sit here today, before COVID started, there were 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country. 140 million. That's 43% of the nation, 52% of our children. Now, poverty came down during COVID to 112 million. Somebody take this for me. But that's because of the relief money that came. But all the relief money is temporary. So the numbers are going to head right back up. Over 100 million people in the wealthiest nation in the world are poor and low wealth. 60.9% of all black people are poor and low wealth. That's 26 million people. 30% of all white people, that's 66 million white people. 68% of Latinos. What are we going to do with that? 700 people die every day from poverty. 700 people die every day from poverty. 250,000 people die every year from just poverty, according to the Mailman School of Public Policy. And you know, you don't hear politicians talking about this. When's the last time you heard a presidential debate on poverty, where candidates for president were asked, what are you going to do about poverty if you become the president of this country? We hear about the middle class. We hear about the wealthy. In the South, 1/3 of all poor people live in the South. In the South, there's not one state in the South that has under 40% of its people in poverty and low wealth. In the South. In the South, we have people dying because they can't eat. Food deserts. In this country, we have 400 families who make $97,000 an hour, while you can get arrested simply for fighting for $15 living wage. I know I've been arrested 7 times for just standing for living wages. Hardly any of the southern states expanded Medicaid. 87 million people in this country are uninsured or underinsured. 4 million people get up every morning, can buy unleaded gas, can't buy unleaded water. Our military budget is $800+ billion. If we cut it in half, we would still have more money than Iran, Iraq, Russia, North Korea, and China combined. If we took just 10% of our military money, we could provide health care and public education for all of the people of this country. We hear lies about scarcity. There's no scarcity. We created more billionaires during COVID. Poor people died at a rate 3 to 5 times higher during COVID, not because the germ discriminated, but because we discriminated in the way we delivered services. What do we do with this? What do we do with the fact that whenever we start talking about addressing these issues, the first question is, how much will it cost? And not how much is it costing us for things to stay as they are. You heard my dear sister talk about the Voting Rights Act and how it was gutted on June 25th, 2013. Let me go a little bit further. The Voting Rights Act, Bishop, has been gutted for 10 years. For 10 years, the Congress could have fixed it. For 10 years, through multiple administrations, that it has not been fixed. And last year, it passed in the House, but 52 senators, 50 Republicans, and 2 Democrats said no. Some of them wanted to come down here to Selma and walk across the bridge and say that they love what the people did in the past. But how can you love what folk did in the past and you vote against what they did in the present? So we have less voting rights today than we had August 6, 1965. I've been thinking about this a lot, how this country, we could pass an infrastructure bill for bridges, roads, we passed an inflation bill. But when it came time for the most sacred aspect of our democracy, 50 Republicans and 2 Democrats said no. I wish members of the Black Caucus were here because I was going to say to them, in hindsight, every member of the Black Caucus and the Progressive Caucus and the Latino Caucus, the Women's Caucus, should have said, no, we're not voting for nothing until we get voting rights and living wages. And voting rights suppression doesn't just hurt black folk. One study said 50 million Americans are being hurt because of the current voter suppression that's going on in this country. 50 million. What do we do with this? What do we do with the fact that right here in Alabama, 45% of all the people in Alabama are poor and low wealth? 2.1 million residents, 53% of the children, 47% of women, 60% of people of color, 37% of white people, 1.1 million white people. 103,000 veterans make less than $35,000 a year. 420,000 people in Alabama are uninsured. 36% of the census tracts in Alabama, people can't afford water. 3,800 people are homeless every day. You have to work 82 hours a week at a minimum wage job to maybe afford a 2-bedroom apartment. 948,000 workers make less than $15 an hour. 51% of all Alabama workforce makes less than $15 an hour, the 7th highest percentage of any state. And you have a governor who's been against expanding health care in the middle of a pandemic. And you got a governor that's more interested in how people are executed than how people have health care. What do we do with this? Then over in Florida, you got the DeSantis deflection. You know why he's trying to block Black History programs? Because he doesn't want us to talk about the real issues. He's doing the same thing George Wallace did. Segregation yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It's a deflection. That's why he's attacking Mickey Mouse in history courses. And he did not get his teaching from Trump. You got to go back further. You got to go back to Wallace and Tillman and Thurman and Southern governors. You got to go back to the first Reconstruction and the end of Reconstruction. DeSantis is not a little Trump. He's worse. See, he doesn't want us to talk about the fact that 47% of Florida's citizens are poor, 10 million people, and his policies aren't doing anything to help them. He doesn't want us to talk about the fact that the minimum wage of $11 an hour in Florida, you still have to work 80 hours a week to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. He does not want us to talk about that 50% of Florida's workforce makes less than $15 an hour, 2.7 million people. He doesn't want us to talk about this. He wants to sell people the psychological wages of whiteness. That's what W.B. Du Bois called it. And the truth of the matter is, somebody might get mad at me, but some of us, we ought to be a little ashamed that we didn't get mad with DeSantis until he messed with a history course. So you wasn't bothered by him blocking your living wages? You wasn't bothered by him blocking health care? That's the fight he wants. That's the deflection. He wants just a black-white fight. What he does not want is a fight over human rights, because if you take him to school on human rights, he gets an F every time. Dr. King said at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, the greatest fear of the Southern aristocracy was the possibility of the masses of black people and the masses of poor white folk coming together and forming a voting bloc that would fundamentally change the economic architecture of the country. Well, I had a lot more to say, but let me ask you, what do you do with this? Well, you don't shrink back. First thing we got to do is deal with this, is recognize that all these issues are not about Democrat versus Republican and left versus right, but right versus wrong. And we can't ever forget that this movement began in a church. If there's ever been a time people of faith need to stand up, it's right now. If there's ever been a time that preachers need to be on fire in the pulpit, it's right now. If there's ever been a time we need to challenge injustice from the pulpits and from the pew, it's right now. My Bible says that God says in Isaiah 10, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their right. My Bible says in Micah 6, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly before your God. My Bible says in Luke chapter 4, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor. My Bible says, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was sick, did you come see about me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? Inasmuch as you do unto the least of these. This is no time for the church to shrink back. Shrinking back is not an option. We need to stand up and push forward, but there's something else. Inside of the pain is also possibility. You heard me say that there's not a state in this country, in the South, that's under 40% poor and low wealth. That's the pain. But let me tell you the possibility. You see, God has a strange way. If you keep messing with folk, he'll make it so the stones that the builders rejected can become the chief cornerstone of a new reality. You keep messing with God, God will raise up the valley of dry bones and give them possibility to come together. Yes, 40% of every southern state is poor and low wealth. But what that also means is that poor and low wealth people now make up 40% of the electorate. And there's not a southern state where if 20% of poor and low wealth people across the board, not just black people, but poor black folk and white folk and Latinos and indigenous people in Asia, if they came together, the stones that the builders rejected could choose presidents and choose governors and choose senators. We have more power now than our foreparents ever had. Question is, what are we going to do with it, Bishop? And I suggest that it's time to come together. And y'all in Alabama, don't let folk lie to y'all and say white and black folk ain't never come together. Do you know in 1869, white and black folk came together and formed unions in Alabama? In 1870? In the 1880s, if they did it then, we can do it now. If they did it back then, what did they do in 65? They didn't have any black caucus in 65. They didn't even have a president that wanted to pass the Voting Rights Act. But they decided, it wasn't even an election year, but they elected to change the atmosphere because they said shrinking back is not an option. How did slavery come down? Somebody decided to stand up and push forward and declare shrinking back was not an option. How did Jim Crow come down? Somebody decided to stand up and push forward and not shrink back. How did women get the right to vote? Somebody decided to stand up and push forward and not shrink back. How did apartheid end? Somebody decided to stand up and push forward and not shrink back. And so my brothers and sisters, this is where we are. And I just was thinking about it, and I'm gonna close right here. I was thinking about how we are here today. 404 years since the first ship landed in Virginia to bring slaves. And we've been standing up and pushing forward ever since. 250 years since Crispus Attucks was the first black person to die fighting for the American democracy. And we've been standing up and pushing forward ever since then. 236 years since we were called fractions in the Constitution. But what we've been doing, standing up and pushing forward ever since then. 174 years since Harriet Tubman escaped slavery. We've been standing up and pushing forward. 171 years since Frederick Douglass said that your July 4th is nothing but fraud and bombast and hypocrisy until America does right by the sons and daughters of slaves. We've been standing up and pushing forward. 160 years since the Emancipation Proclamation. We've been what? Standing up and pushing forward. 153 years since the ratification of the 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote. We've been what? Standing up and pushing forward. 69 years since black, white, Jewish women lawyers won the Brown versus Board of Education and tore sacred but evil down. What we've been doing? Standing up and pushing forward. 68 years since the murder of Emmett Till and his mama made the whole world look at his body. We've been what? Standing up and pushing forward. 68 years since the Montgomery bus boycott lasted 381 days. What we've been doing? Standing up and pushing forward. 59 years since Fannie Lou Hamer said there comes a time when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. We've been doing what? Standing up and pushing forward. 60 years since the murder of Medgar Evers. 60 years since the March on Washington. 60 years since the bombing of 4 girls in a Birmingham church. 59 years since the signing of the Civil Rights Act. 58 years since Malcolm was killed. 56 years since Martin Luther King said nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now, and then he was killed the next day. What have we been doing? Standing up and pushing forward. Turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, shrinking back is not an option until every child is educated, until the vote is protected, until everybody has health care, until police violence is stopped, until voting rights are expanded, until saving the world is more important than blowing up the world. We can't shrink back. We've come too far to turn back now. Do I have a witness in this house? Tell your neighbor, say, neighbor, we've come this far by faith, leaning and depending on the Lord. Nothing has stopped us yet. We won't turn back. Shrinking back is not an option. It's time to stand up, push forward, keep winning, keep believing. God is on our side. Do I have a witness? Won't God help us? Won't God make a way? Tell your neighbor, neighbor, shrinking back is not an option. Falling back is not an option. Standing back is not an option. Going back is not an option. Turning back is not an option. Stand up. Push forward. God will carry us all